the world was falling apart. Fascist Nazi shock troops of the Third Reich and their blitzkrieg had spread across Europe and northern Africa, and were marching their eastern front deep into the heart of Russia. The Empire of Japan was making its conquest of the Pacific reality. 65 million human lives would be lost. 11 million would eventually be systematically exterminated by an evil war machine like the world had never seen before. To gain a foothold into Europe and take on the armies of Hitler's Nazi Third Reich, the world needed a new elite type of soldier. The paratrooper was that soldier. Changing Hearts and Minds welcomes you to a special series dedicated to the greatest generation, and specifically the well-known story that inspired the best-selling book and HBO miniseries, Band of Brothers. Join me, Jeff Adamec, veteran of the U.S. Army where I served as a paratrooper in the 82nd, Ranger in the 2nd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment, and finally as a Green Beret in 3rd Special Forces Group, as I welcome fellow veterans, other podcast hosts and personalities, and some very special guests to honor the true story, book, and television series about the greatest generation's most honored story of sacrifice, service, and leadership in the face of overwhelming evil. Lessons in Leadership, the men and history of Easy Company.
The Toccoa men, that's the ones that was there at the very beginning. They are very close, and they accept people coming in like myself as a replacement, but you also have to prove yourself.
Well, most of them were qualified parachutists. They had to be. A lot of them were awfully green, and we knew that. We hoped we could keep them alive, or they could keep alive. A lot of them didn't. But, no, it was all right. They eventually blend right in.
I think maybe they were trying to impress the older guys, maybe people like me or Shifty, or I don't know why, but I got right there to where I didn't want to be friendly with replacements coming in because, God, I didn't like to see them get killed. It just tore me up.
Because we were in awe of them. They were wearing infantry badges, their uniform. They had a star on their jump wings. They were like heroes to us, That's how we looked at them. And they were good. Furthermore, they were good. We had good officers for the most part, but we had excellent NCOs. They looked after you.
This is Change Your POV and Changing Hearts and Minds present Lessons in Leadership, Band of Brothers. You guys know, if you're listening to this, and this is the first episode you're listening to, you need to call me. We need to talk about your orders of work, your priorities of work. And so if this is the first episode you listen to, I don't know why. And there's something wrong with you. Give me a call. We'll figure out why 1 is 1 and 4 is 4. But for the rest of you, you've been listening, so I don't have to explain again exactly what this 10-part series or 11-part series or 12, however it ends up being. Definitely 10, though, will be. So I'm not going to do it. This is the 4th episode. I think I've won the right to not go out and talk about exactly what this show is about. Do you agree, Eddie?
I agree.
All right, guys, you hear that voice? That was Eddie Lazzari.
Kurahi!
Kurahi, yeah. Eddie took 2 weeks to practice Kurahi to make sure he could say it right. I'm kidding.
Man, I said it for like a year in Korea.
Yeah, in Korea. So let me ask you a question, Eddie. This is related. So I struggled over your telling me that story. So are you meaning to tell me that the 506 is no longer part of the 101st and is now part of the units in Korea?
Yes, 2nd Infantry Division. So I was a part of Charlie Company, 1st Battalion, 506 Infantry in Korea on the DMZ. And yeah, man, it's, we had the unit crest with the little, the parachute, and it, none of us were quote unquote parachute or airborne.
Well,
it was
no one in the 101st anymore is either. So
right, yeah, it was an air assault. They called it an air assault infantry unit. So like I said, we were right on the DMZ. So we, if shit hit the fan, they would basically blow all the bridges heading southbound. And we were north of the river, so we would basically have been stranded on the northern side of the river that cuts basically North and South Korea in two. And
the opportunities for heroism are large, man. You should be
absolutely. Yeah, and we, other than some light-skinned vehicles, we didn't have enough to transport the entire battalion, but we did have helicopters, and so that would have been our mode of transportation had shit hit the fan.
I got bad news. I got bad news for you, and I'm going to echo what some people may be thinking right now. Everyone's got helicopters. I think air assault is the worst thing in the history of the military to do to the 101st Airborne Division. I honestly believe that, because I understand they needed to drop down to one division, and so they only kept one airborne division.
Mm-hmm.
But I think they should have kept airborne there, even if they didn't pay for it. I mean, the 101st is just as much a part of the legacy of airborne as 82nd is.
Oh, absolutely. I agree.
I mean, the fact that you don't change the unit patch, you still call it the 101st Airborne Division. All that says that there's a legacy there that requires a better parting gift than air assault.
Right.
Which was quickly made obsolete by fast roping.
Correct.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
Air assault. The Bullwinkle badge is the next two.
Bullwinkle badge.
The next two are weapons qualification bolo badges.
Oh, yes.
And our driver's badges. The only thing that's on our uniform that has absolutely no reason to be there but for swag is the Bullwinkle badge.
Bullwinkle badge.
I got 6 chances to go to air assault school. I turned down all 6 chances.
What, you didn't want your Bullwinkle badge?
I saw no purpose. Having said that, guys, we are going to talk to you about a giant military operation today that was recorded, talked about. There's a controversy over the outcome. It was a failure. The mission never accomplished its goals, and too many guys got killed. And so therefore, no matter what different people who want to break it down say, failure to accomplish mission, if that is one of the mental tasks of mission accomplishment, it's a failure. Do you agree?
I totally agree, yeah.
Right. And there's nothing wrong with being part. I mean, what they did, there's the fact that they went a bridge too far. I mean, you go one bridge. Okay, so 2 bridges, right? No, 1 bridge. All right, 2 bridges. To this day, I can't. It's comical to me, but only because the movies I'm talking about the movie A Bridge Too Far. One of the reasons why that Market Garden failed, guys, was because of this unit that went on a hike and allowed themselves to be completely surrounded by Germans who had no expectation that anyone would be so stupid to walk right into their garrison.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, episode 4, replacements. This is also a good episode to have a little bit of a joke back and forth with, because the guys that die in this episode, guys, you've never seen them before and never will hear of them again. So no harm, no foul, no emotional investment by the viewer. Not to say that they weren't real people who died, but the viewer doesn't emotionally get invested in these characters. They're kind of fodder. But what's sad is that's exactly what they were.
Right.
So last week, they finally took Carrington. They finally took the city that was their D-Day mission. After we hear that Blythe is always misconstrued as having PTSD when that's not what was happening with him. But also that he didn't really die in 1947, and that the producers made their first mistake of few in this episode, or in this series. So I want to give them credit. There was very few errors they made. That was one of them. That was one that was known right away, because Blythe's family was like, wait a minute, he fought in Korea. He did this. So they really did just drop the ball on that. But, continuity is hard in Hollywood sometimes when you're talking about dates.
Yeah.
So I'll give them a break, because I understand it's hard to get a date right. And yes, guys, if you're thinking I'm being sarcastic, I am. Dates should be the one thing they don't get wrong. So continuity, guys, failure.
Especially, I mean, getting a date on when a particular battle.
Getting a date on a guy dying.
Right. Yeah, when somebody dies, it's kind of like, I don't know. That's a kind of a hard date, isn't it?
Yeah, you can kind of put my name in Google, and it'll tell you when I'm going to die now. It's that out there. So no excuse. I mean, the date that they had him dying at had nothing to do with anything. That was the thing that was confusing about it.
Right.
It had, guys, at the end of the episode, we talked about it, but I want to bring it up again because I think it's a very, very emotional, and it's one of my favorite, is when Malarkey going back to pick up his uniform, and he realizes that he's got to take the uniforms of some guys that have died. And he does a very good job of not, and I mean this, he doesn't tell that woman that those guys are dead.
Hello? Oh. Good morning, Miss Lamb. Sorry to bother you so early.
That's all right. Private
Malarkey.
Come in.
Actually, it's Sergeant Malarkey now, ma'am. I just got promoted.
Oh, lovely. I expect you'll be wanting your laundry. I heard the trucks rumbling by all night. I guess the Yanks must be on their way off again.
Yes, ma'am. Looks like for good this time.
I'm sorry to hear that. 2 shirts, 2 pairs of trousers, light starch, 2 bobby buttons, please. Thank you. Would you like a cup of tea? I've got the water boiling.
No, thank you. I'm in a hell of a bit of a hurry. But thank you anyway.
Oh, Private?
Yes, ma'am.
Lieutenant Meehan's one of yours, isn't he? I hope he hasn't forgotten his laundry.
I'll take it.
Thank you. You couldn't be a dear, help me with a few others, could you? Let's see. Sergeant Evans, Private Moyer, Bloser, Gray, Miller, Owen, Collins, Elliot.
That was when the first time you realized the toll that the D-Day events took on Easy Company.
And I think too, Jeff, it's important to point out that dealing with a dead soldier's personal effects after the fact is a part of war, and it's something that many don't really consider or realize. And I didn't either until my first soldier died to an IED, and I was basically pulled into the first sergeant's office and my platoon sergeant's office and said, get a notebook and a pen, and you got to go and take inventory of all of his personal effects and gather up all of his gear. And so I was completely kind of taken back. And it was one of those things where it was like, once I was told that I had to do that, I was like, of course that has to happen. But why didn't I even think about that I was one of those things like I was completely oblivious to.
Right. As Malarkey, you can see in Malarkey's face in the episode. He's exactly. Finally realizing, oh my God, there's so many. You're in an environment that's new to you. You're trying to deal with it. You have guys that are still your friends there helping you get through it. Even though you know that plane went down and that so many guys have been shot and killed, you still don't put together the toll until you get back to the real world. Yeah. And that small little piece of it is it's such a well filmed part.
And that's the thing too that is so amazing about the Band of Brothers series is it came out in what, 2001, 2002 timeframe?
I don't know. I think it was 1947 according to the show producers.
No,
I'm just kidding.
I think it was 2001, 2002. It was before our deployment in 2004. And
I watched it. I watched it on my first deployment to Afghanistan on DVD, so it had to have been out before. I think it was out before 9/11.
No, I think it was 2001, 2002. Somewhere
right after, a year after Saving Private Ryan came out is when this released.
Yeah.
Because it was right on the heels of it.
And that's the thing about this series that I find so fascinating is when I watched the series when it came out initially, it was before I went to combat. And there was things that I just loved the series for that I picked up on as far as being in the military and training your troops. And like I was able to connect with those things. I was completely... after my deployment, I come back and I watch the series again,
and it's a different show, huh?
It is because there's little things like that look on Malarkey's face when he realizes
Buck Compton dropping the helmet in the woods.
Yes. There's so many things about the series that resonated with me after my combat deployment that I didn't even think about or consider prior to my deployment. So that's one of the things that I think is so interesting about doing this series, this companion series, a podcast episode, and really unpacking each of the shows is to kind of get our interpretation and our take on those little intricacies that you probably wouldn't have picked up or noticed yourself, right? And
I notice everything, Eddie. I don't know.
I know you do, but
No,
I'm
I
talking
don't.
about listeners out there that may not.
Took me 15 years to notice that Sobel wasn't a bad guy.
Right.
And even knowing what he was doing, it took me a long time to realize it.
Yep.
And that to me was the beauty of when I finally turned that show on after years and years and said, oh, the method to his madness right here. And not agreeing with everything he did, but he was also a guy that he was just as much in the Army as any of those other guys. And guys, we're going to talk about Sobel here because he's in this episode, and I want to bring him up again. But Sobel, as I said in the first episode, he had just as much experience in the military as the privates did. That's what people fail to remember. These guys were all volunteers. The Greatest Generation was a military of non-military men. Guys who were there to fight the war and then go back home. And so when you have those guys and you put them in a situation where they're meant to lead and they're not ever molded into being combat leader. I mean, look at Patton. He was molded to be a combat leader from the day he was born, and he still failed at it. And I say that knowing that he was a great leader and a warrior that won, but I'm sorry, if you can't not use yelling at guys and making bold statements to motivate them and don't understand what's going on inside of a heart and mind of one of your men, you're not leading them, you're managing them. And Patton was a great manager. Boom. Angry emails coming, Jeff. But anyway.
Well, so
but that's Sobel right there. Sobel's trying to do the best he can with his little amount of knowledge on it, and we hate him for it.
Well, and I agree. And airborne infantry at the time was completely brand new to everybody, right? So not only you got a bunch of people that are new to the military in general, but now you got this crazy thing called airborne and developing the tactics associated with airborne.
Those are Eddie's opinions. I think it's crazy to land in a plane.
Well, yeah. But everybody's trying to figure it out. So it was very similar to an episode I did with this morning with Bennett, and we were talking about when I was in Iraq 04, 05, looking for IEDs and light skin Humvees and how we were going about that, and he was just kind of chuckled. Now that we know what we know today, and listening to how things were done back then, it's like it's comical to listen to the way we were doing things. But he brought up a good point. He's like, well, you guys didn't know better. You guys were writing the SOP when you guys were out there learning how to do this for the very first time ever. I think one of the things, and I'm just spitballing here, but one of the things that I think that the Hunter First guys had as an advantage over their conventional counterpart, the regular airborne infantry, was the way. Well, is the way they were training and conducting a movement to contact, because jumping, literally, you're not operating behind a flot, right? You're literally jumping into enemy territory, and you're surrounded on all sides by the enemy. And so movement to contact has to be dealt with in a different way.
Well, only differently to begin with. Your security is at 360 to start.
That's correct. But I'm talking like immediate, like close ambush, right?
Yeah.
Like those guys, they were literally jumping into close ambush. And so they had to literally hit the ground. And I know it sounds cliche, but hit the ground running, like literally, not just running, but running and shooting and movement to contact and depending on where they were jumping in and what their mission was. But they were jumping into essentially enemy occupied territory and surrounded on all sides. That needs to be the mentality of that airborne trooper going out of the door of that plane.
That's to me. I don't want guys who want it any other way.
But it's just it's a totally different way of thinking about the battle space than folks that are even amphibiously landing, because you clearly have a rear echelon or behind the lines, and you got a fallback point, and you've got your forward progression, you got phase lines, you've got advancement on the, so it's a very linear.
I think, to put it in perspective. So as a paratrooper for my entire career, I was never in the Army where I wasn't qualified. I was in the 82nd Ranger Battalion in SF. Every month of my service, except for the first 2, I was a paratrooper. I look at Operation Neptune, the amphibious landing at the beaches. Mm-hmm. That to me is insane. So you know what I'm saying? Like, people look at the 2 and they're like, oh, look at these guys. They jump behind the lines. They did all this stuff. That to me makes sense. The amphibious landing to me is what I'm like, oh, those guys. God bless them, dude. There's no hope for you. So to me, it's an outlook. It's how you look at the way. It's also the way you were designed and drawn
Yeah,
built up in
absolutely.
the military.
Yep,
They didn't know
absolutely.
that they were elite. They knew that they were better because they were told so.
Mhm.
But they needed to believe that. They didn't realize that along the way they had become a very special and unique group of men.
Right.
So, like the other episodes, guys, we are going to spotlight certain characters, and by the end of all the episodes, you will have gotten and I say mine and whoever my guest is, breakdown of these episodes. Today's 2 episode characters are Bull Randleman, and the second one is the replacement troops as a whole. I will talk about that, but tell us who Bull Randleman is.
Yeah, so Bull Randleman, Staff Sergeant Denver Bull Randleman, was a paratrooper in Easy Company. He was born in Rector, Arkansas on November.
Was he a Toccoa man?
Yes, he was, Jeff, a Toccoa man. So Randleman was born in Rector, Arkansas on 20 November 1920 during the Great Depression. Yeah, and he went to Michigan and found work there. He enlisted in U.S. Airborne Infantry in August 1942, which would have made him 22 years of age, which now, to put it into perspective, is rather he was a bit older than probably many of his counterparts.
That comes
at the
through in
time
the
of
show, do you
enlistment.
think?
What's that?
That comes through in the show.
Yeah, I think so.
That's why
I
that
think
makes sense to me, because he does seem like a more mature, seasoned man.
Yeah, 22. We say that today, right? 20. My son's almost 22, and it's like, but when you're 22 and everyone else that's joining is 18, 19, in some cases even 17, even the officers, right? So 22 years of age, enlisted guy, is probably he's considered like the old man on the team, right? Basically. So yeah, he was assigned to Easy Company, 2nd Battalion, 506 Parachute Infantry Regiment of the 101st Airborne Division as a rifleman of 3rd Squad, 1st Platoon. He went through basic training at Camp Toccoa in Georgia under the hardship leadership of Captain Herbert Sobel, which I know we're going to talk about at length throughout this series.
No, we're actually done with it after this.
And after training, Randleman became a paratrooper at Fort Benning and was promoted to corporal, and then made commander of 3rd Squad at how do you say this? Aldbourne, England?
Adelbourne.
Adelbourne, at Adelbourne, England.
The namesake for the E at the end of the word airborne.
Yeah, okay. Is it really?
Yeah. I mean, the reason why airborne has an E at the end was because they weren't stationed at Georgia first. After training and after being assigned to the 101st, they were stationed at Adelbourne, England.
That makes sense now.
Yeah, and that's in the first episode. I know that, guys, you have to understand, I'm recording this episode with Eddie days after I recorded the first episode. He hasn't heard it.
Right,
so
haven't heard it.
He's not ignorant because he doesn't pay attention.
Maybe so. Maybe I'm just ignorant.
Maybe. Toccoa man is a pretty, that one's
on me.
I'm going to put that one on you.
Okay.
But I'll put the mistake on me for not checking beforehand. I'll never make that mistake again, Eddie. I will assume you don't know. Okay. Like I do with my kid.
Always assume I don't know.
I will always
assume.
So,
Adelbourne, England. Yeah. He and his fellow non-coms. Now, this is something that I really wanted to kind of talk about. It happened prior to
you want to talk
4.
About the incident with the NCOs?
Yeah. So
four episodes too late for that, buddy.
I know his non-coms mutinied against Sobel, and they were berated and demoted by Colonel Robert F. Sink, played by, as we all know, Dale Dye, and
threatened the show.
And threatened with execution as a result of the mutiny. They were spared only because the Normandy invasion was upon them, and they needed well-trained NCOs, in particular NCOs that were airborne qualified.
And
so
let's be honest, the posturing of "we're going to shoot you," if they believed they were wrong, they would not have gotten rid of Sobel. That makes sense?
True. That's absolutely true.
So they had to be yelled at. They had to be dealt with because they were wrong. And I agree with they were wrong. They should. That you never abandon your privates because you don't like your leader. You stay there to make sure they're taken care of. But what they did was effective, and what they did was not viewed as being wrong. Sink had to yell at them.
Right.
I mean,
absolutely.
He can't have that shit going on.
No. Absolutely. He totally was. He absolutely. And the thing about it is, I don't think Sink was oblivious to the fact that Sobel was I
think he was
a less than desirable.
Me and Sam Culper talk about it, and he convinced me. I think Sink was oblivious.
You think so?
Because
you think
here's why.
You think think the mutiny was the first insight into that?
I think that he did not see the writing on the wall till that moment, and the reason why is because
we agree now, after Sam and me talked about it, that someone should have stepped into the Easy Company situation far earlier to avoid this situation. This situation never would have happened if the command climate had noticed that there was a personality problem between Sobel and Winters, and that the commander was openly being vindictive.
Right.
They knew about the court-martial thing.
Right.
If that was something, if they knew what was going on in the company, when that court-martial came up, they should have stepped in right away before the NCOs had to do it.
Right.
And another reason why I believe that he agreed with the NCOs, Carl Wood-Lipton would never be an officer in the underneath sink, no matter what he did in combat, because he was a ringleader of that incident.
Right. You're talking about, are you talking about the court-martial?
Trying to give a Article 15 to Winters, who said, I don't want to take it. Yeah, he didn't take it. He asked for a court-martial.
Yep. Absolutely. You think that was
I think that should have been the time they stepped in. No, that should have been an indicator. That should have been the last straw.
No, but what I'm asking, Jeff, is at what point do you think Sink started to get suspicions that maybe Sobel was
10 minutes before he brought those NCOs in?
Okay, so
I'm
you don't
giving him
think
credit as a leader to say that he was ignorant to it, not ignoring it.
Right.
Because I don't want to believe he ignored it.
Oh, I think if he would have known,
Yeah.
I don't think he would have ignored it either. But you're right. He absolutely had to take action. He had to do something. Otherwise, you're setting a very dangerous precedent. That if you don't like even when you take the oath when you first join the military, that's part of it. You will obey the officers, obey the commands of the officers, over you. I don't know the exact verbiage.
And to that point, Sobel had not given an unlawful order at any time.
Right.
So therefore, they were guilty of mutiny.
Yeah, and it wasn't about them not wanting to follow his orders. It was about them not wanting to follow that particular man in the combat, right?
So with that knowledge and them believing that, I'll give them a little bit of a break, but I still don't like what they did.
I think this was the first. We're talking about Bull Randleman here, and as it pertains to the series. I think even though it wasn't episode 4, I think this was the first look into the leadership quality that Randleman had.
He was a corporal, right? At this time, or E5?
At this time, he was a corporal,
and he's one of the 5 guys who didn't sign the paper, right?
No, he mutant again. He signed it. Yes,
he signed it after they asked him to. He wasn't one of the guys that put his name on that note that they sent. There was 5 guys.
Oh, Randleman, I don't know about the note.
Yeah, he was part. Yeah. Randleman, and there was 3 other well-known guys that are there in the episode, showing like they were part of it.
Yeah,
that were 100% against the idea.
Yeah, but
that's what I love about him.
Well, here's the thing. I think this was the first show of leadership on Randleman's part. Not that I agree with the mutiny, but I understand it, right? Agreeing with and understanding 2 different things. But at the same time, I would have done the same thing in that position, I think.
Okay. I agree. I think I would have done the same thing in that position too.
And I think it was the first kind of display of the love that these guys had for
each other.
They're lower enlisted. I mean, granted, there was an absolute chance that they could have been executed and that their soldiers would have went into combat under the direction and leadership of Sobel. But I think at the end of the day, they said, if we don't take a stand here and do what's right by our men.
Well, I think following the NCO mindset, they weren't wrong. Their actions were wrong.
Well, right, absolutely. But again, how many things in combat and in war do we struggle with when it comes to morals?
In all honesty, Eddie, this didn't happen in combat. This happened in garrison.
No, but I understand that. But this is in preparation for combat. Let me break it down.
I know. I don't think we have to beat the dead horse. I agree with you. I understand what you're saying.
Let me give you a quick story. So before we deployed, right, we got, we were training up at Fort Hood for, I was there since 2001. I went from Korea to Fort Hood, and I was there when 9/11 happened and all this, and I was a hard NCO. I'll admit it. I was an asshole. I was very, very hard on my guys. I demanded the very best from them. I expected the very best from them. I was not an easy NCO. I know that for a fact. The whole time I was in, I was not an easy NCO. I was a screamer.
I'm gonna need to see evidence. I'm sorry.
I know. You could talk to my guys. I'll tell you. There's a lot of things that I did that I don't regret. But there's some things that I regret in terms of the way I handled it. But that said, I knew my job. I knew it very well. And I'm not just saying that. I proved it through different, we had, annual competitions, and I was very successful at those. Hand selected to do a lot of the, important details and tasks, things like that. So I knew I was squared away.
Goddamn professional NCO, Eddie. You're damn right you were.
And my guys were squared away. All right. But I was fucking hard on my guys, man. I was. And so much so that, the only people that liked me, the only soldiers that liked me were my guys, the ones I was being hard on, because they understood me and they knew where I was coming from. But if you were
was
on
it
the
an
outside,
eventual love? Did you have there's no way that someone that doesn't understand that at first can love you for it?
No, they didn't. It was after they got to know kind of the way I dealt, or the way I did business, right? So all of my soldiers hated me at first, but ended up coming to love me, even though I was hard on their asses. But they knew that and they understood that. But from the soldiers look from the outside looking in, like they didn't see the other stuff that my soldiers got to see. I just came across as just a hard ass, right? Well, anyway,
raging hard on, if you will.
So this is where I was going with the story. So all of a sudden, there's all kinds of Joes, and I other NCOs would share with me, and other soldiers would share with me the different opinions that people had about me. So I knew where I stood. There was no secrets. There was no wondering what the hell people thought of me.
Hard but not feared. That's what I'm saying.
I knew people, probably didn't like me, but what ended up happening as soon as we got deployment orders and we knew we were heading over to Iraq, a little bit, it didn't happen all at once, but a little bit at a time, over the next few weeks and months leading up to our deployment, some of those same soldiers that really, really just didn't like me, couldn't stand me, they would pull me aside very respectfully at parade rest and ask me if they could come on my team.
Right.
And I was like, you fucking can't stand my ass. And I said that straight to their faces. And they're like, I know I don't really care for you, Sergeant, and the way you do things, but I know that I've got a better chance going into combat with you than, because some of these guys, nothing to take away from the other NCOs, some of these soldiers are going out on the weekend with their NCOs and getting drunk and their friends.
You know what? Don't do that. Don't do that. They're wrong.
I know
They're
that.
Fucking wrong.
I know they were wrong. But see, those NCOs had a friendship relationship with their soldiers.
Right.
I had a non-commissioned officer soldier relationship with my men.
God bless you for it.
So because of that, I wasn't fan favorite, and I wasn't somebody that they wanted to go hang out with on the weekends. I was never invited to anything, and I understood why, right? But when that deployment order came out, these same guys that were loving their NCOs, hanging out with them on the weekend, going to the bars or whatever, like they didn't want to go to combat.
They don't want a friend. They want a leader. Exactly.
And so it was that experience that I really resonate with the actions that these guys took in the face of ultimately could have been their demise.
No, they're standing up for their what they believe is the best course of action for Easy Company.
For their men, right? Absolutely.
And like I said, it's a simple disagreement with them under what they did. The message it may have sent to a private who didn't understand the purpose.
Right. Correct.
You know what I mean? So, having said that, not a big deal.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to derail it, but
it doesn't derail it. We're still talking about Bull Randleman, so
that was.
Be careful not to go and give everyone Bull Randleman's final, tell his history up into the point of the show. You don't mind.
Yeah, and so Randleman came. I don't know if it was this way in real life, but Randleman across the few episodes that he was portrayed in the Band of Brothers series, he was a very quiet, unassuming character, large, not only in size but in kind of scale and life. Looking at, there's very few actual pictures of the real Denver Randleman that I could find. And the ones that I did find, this kid, I call him a kid, he didn't doesn't look like a very larger than life, bigger than his buddy's kind of person like he's
Right.
portrayed in the film. But I think they got it right in finding.
I think they got it right with the actor.
I think they got it right with the actor because even though he may not have been, that way physically big and kind of an elder, so to speak, he definitely was to his men, I think. And he was kind of a quieter guy, but when he did open his mouth and speak, he spoke with meaning and purpose. Right?
And he was considered by the other NCOs to be someone that was worth listening to, and they always refer to it in the show whenever they talk about him.
Oh yeah,
if I listen to what Bull says, because Sergeant Randleman knows what he's talking about.
Oh, that's exactly That's what Shifty says. Shifty says, "You boys listen to Sergeant Randleman." And the smartest guy in Easy Company, right, is what Shifty says.
Yes, smartest guy because he's the guy that kept his mouth shut for most of the time, which is a good indication of being smart.
Right.
But before we get too into it, I want to talk about Michael Cudlitz before we go on.
Yeah.
This guy, I'm agreeing with you with the whole. There's not a lot of images around him, so a lot of the guys have to create the character they're playing to a person that's really out there. Yeah. And although he met Bull Randleman, Bull Randleman really was this quiet, actions speak louder than words kind of guy. And I think Michael Cudlitz is, okay, a lot of people don't realize this. They see all the characters he plays, Walking Dead, this show, and you would assume this guy is from Mississippi. This guy is not from Mississippi. This guy is from Long Island, New York. But yet he plays that southern, forgive me for saying it, I mean it with good intent, but the backwoods redneck guy, the
yeah.
salt of the earth, Bible-fearing woodsman so well that he's made a whole career off of it.
Right.
And he got it from this one character. Because this character is, to me, I don't care how many episodes of, I don't know how famous, Walking Dead gets. Michael Cudlitz is always Bull Randleman to me.
Right, me too.
Right? So, and that says more about him as an actor.
Mm-hmm.
When there's no reference. There is no Bull. Here's a spoiler, guys. There is no Bull Randleman talking before or after the shows. I know everyone likes to wait to the end to see who these guys were talking. Spoiler alert: none of them are Bull Randleman, and it's not because he dies. He doesn't do it.
Yeah,
you put on the Facebook page a picture of Bull and Cudlitz together at one of his birthday parties or something. That's the only picture I've ever seen of him.
Right,
guys. There's something that I don't think I put out yet, but all of my guest hosts have chosen specifically the spotlight person that they wanted to talk about. Now, I'm telling you guys this now so that you can see the reflections in ourselves that we have in the person we chose. You're going to hear me talk at long length about Carlton Lipton. He is the guy that I think is the best leader of the Easy Company because he's everything that I'm not. He's quiet and gets the shit done. I am massively Bill Garnier, and I know it. But Carlton Lipton is my guy. Bull Randleman, if you think about everything that you just talked about, Eddie, you're describing you as an NCO as a more vocal Bull Randleman.
Right.
And and where that comes from, why I can say that with honesty, is because of the opening scene in the bar. Bull's interaction with my favorite character in the show, Private Cobb, after he goes after the replacements. But before we get to that, the second highlighted people for this show, is the replacement troops themselves. The replacement troops are represented by, guys, here's something that a lot of people didn't know. Babe Heffron, who is one of the most famous paratroopers, was a replacement. His first appearance in Easy Company happens in this group of replacements that comes. Easy Company left for D-Day with 139 paratroopers, officers and NCOs and privates, and returned with 74 guys. They went with 139, returned with 74. They got a large group of new paratroops in at this time when they returned back to England after Carrington was seized. And those guys are the purpose and the soul of this episode. In the opening scene, the guy's talking about the replacements. I'm not going to say who that guy is, but he's talking about the replacements when they come in. And he says something that only combat guys understand. I didn't want to get close to them because I had already lost friends.
Yeah.
So I treated them poorly, not because I didn't like them, but because I knew that it was better for me emotionally to focus on my job if I didn't make more friends that I was going to lose.
Right.
Guys, that didn't mean much to me in 2001. I hear that now and it almost chokes me up because I think about all the guys that I did that to
Yep.
That needed, and that's the thing about the replacement issue with infantry units. Everyone always realizes too late that these guys just needed someone. You see it a lot later on in one of the episodes, actually the second to last episode, between Perconti and some new guy. But he realizes it right then and there when he does it, that she needs to be a different guy to this guy for his sake. It's a shame that Private Miller, who is played by the actor James McAvoy in this show, he needed a friend. And Cobb went after him in this scene, in the opening scene in the bar. They're all sitting there drinking, and guys, everyone knows that the first unit award given for gallantry was given to the 506th. The unit award that pretty much all units have now, that blue one. Back then, it was not normal to give a unit award out. So the unit gets the award, they're all wearing it because they're in that unit. And Cobb is like, do you know what that's for? And he says it even more prickishly than I'm saying it now. He's like, yeah, it's for what the regiment did on D-Day. He goes, yeah, what the regiment did. You weren't here when that happened. Mm-hmm. And he goes after him like a fucking little prick. Like everything about military friggin' douchebags I hate. It comes together in that one scene with Cobb. And when he gets up and Randleman waits for the replacement to leave, and only in the guys that were in Easy Company prior to the replacements, he says to Cobb, you didn't jump into D-Day either.
Yeah, he said, shit, Cobb, you didn't fight in Normandy neither, right?
And understanding that he got injured in the plane and couldn't jump.
Right.
But it's a well-placed reminder to Cobb.
Where'd you get that? It's a Presidential Distinguished Unit citation for what the regiment did in Normandy.
That's right, for what the regiment did. You weren't there.
Hey, ease up, Cobb. It's a unit citation.
So, and I hate Cobb. I'm going to be honest, guys. I hate him. That actor does a great job because I hate him. And this will not be the last time you hear me talk about Cobb. I will talk about him at length. Probably to my wife right after we're done here. She'll wonder why I hate him, but I fucking hate that guy.
Now, I don't know if that was an actual real character or if that was just one for
I don't want to look it up.
screen.
I don't want to look it up and find out because I want to hate him.
Yeah.
So
yeah. So
I agree with you. I think it might be a heel placed in there to represent that kind of mentality.
Right. And there's definitely plenty of people out there with that mentality, right?
And that's why I hate him. He reminds me of people
the badge protectors and the
the Spotlight Rangers and all that shit.
Yeah, so I picked this episode for two reasons. One, because I do in a lot of ways relate with or resonate with Bull Randleman. Not necessarily 100% because I see myself in him, but in a lot of ways I see the exact opposite in him of the way I was.
So,
right?
so with me and Carlton Lipton.
Yeah. So I wasn't the quiet, calm professional that Bull Randleman was. I was very much kind of loud and obnoxious, kind of.
You were sober.
Yeah, I was.
Admit it, you were sober.
I was. In a lot of ways, I was sober. Absolutely was. Yeah. The
you were sober without the happy ending.
Yeah. The difference was, the folks that I put through that bullshit at the end of the day wanted to go to combat with me. So,
right.
I must have done something a little bit different than what Sobel did.
You didn't take him up Currahee a million times. That probably
maybe. Well, I did some pretty rough shit, but one of the things, so that was part of the reason, Randall, and the other part was just the topic of episode 4, which was the replacements. And as you know, I lost some guys and had some wounded pretty early on in our deployment, and we ended up taking on replacements. Mm-hmm. And I remember not being very good to those guys. I was angry, and here's the thing that I really regret is it wasn't. I was angered, but I was angry that they were there, but not because it was them.
You were angry because of what they represented, the loss of the other
guy. Yeah, exactly. And
hey,
I ended up taking
them
it
you
out.
Apologize to.
Huh?
I'm just not. I said I understand. No. It's them you need to apologize to.
I know.
You don't, and you don't. They understand now. But I think that eventually everyone that goes through that eventually understands it. Which is why you don't hear an outpouring of replacement complaints from people. Because they end up doing the same thing. for the same reasons. And not till later do we realize why we did it. And that's why the opening up of that episode is so important. You have to realize up front, for the viewers who don't have that experience, that this was done not to isolate and make us and them. It was done to protect my own psyche and protect my own feelings, which have already been compromised.
Yeah.
I mean, think about that end scene with Malarkey. What that night must have been like for him after that. Right. And now think about the next day having all those guys' positions refilled with brand new guys who were full of piss and vinegar, talking about how great what you did on D-Day was. And D-Day was great, buddy. I lost fucking all my friends.
Right.
It was awesome. So that makes sense, though, when you think about it. And God bless them, brand new guys don't understand that what they're asking for when they pray for war. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like I said, nobody can understand war unless you've been there. Because not a guy that I know prays for it after they've seen it.
Yep.
But guys who haven't seen it pray for it at large, and we hate them for it because we see ourselves in them and say, God, buddy, you have no idea. Jade yourself early because you have no idea what you're going to do.
Right.
So that's why I picked them as the replacement troops as a whole. And there's like 5 or 6 of them. One of them is Babe Heffron. One is Private Miller, played by James McAvoy. Here's some stuff about the episode. James McAvoy has obviously gone on to be a big actor. You know, we've all seen him play Professor X and all, but he also plays Professor X opposite Magneto, who is played by Michael Fassbender, who is in this entire series as Sergeant Christensen.
I didn't connect that.
Right. Yeah. And I'll be here the entire series to throw those out at you. Also, another administrative task. The character. Oh, all right. So we know the main characters are pretty much in every episode. The core 5 or 6. You know, Winters, Lipton. But there's also these characters like Liebgott, who is the German-speaking Jew who is in Randleman's platoon or in Martin's squad. This is the only episode he's not in. He is on screen for every other episode except this one, and there's no reason for it. He was there. He did jump in to Market Garden, which we'll talk about in a second. He just isn't in this episode, but it is the only episode he's not in. So here's your drinking game, guys. You go through every episode other than this one. When you see Liebgott finally, you chug. All right, guys. So they're chugging. They're picking on the replacements. All this stuff's going on. Randleman is being a cigar-smoking redhead. You know, Cobb is being a raging fucking dickhead. And then we find out that they get new orders. And this is a great scene because it shows all these officers walk in and that final realization. And in episodes before this, you saw the officers issue out commands to the guys from them.
Yep.
You saw it. You didn't see that in this episode. You saw them go over to Carlton Lipton, tell him something in his ear and walk off. Carlton Lipton, who is now the newly promoted first sergeant of Easy Company.
Right.
It's a long way from being a E5 on D-Day to a few weeks later being the first sergeant. Mm-hmm. That's a hint of his progression through the military. But he gets up in front of everyone and, in his way, lets them know, guys, we're leaving, and don't leave anything behind because we're not coming back. And that is such a powerful moment because they had that R&R place that they were going to always have. And they just got done with D-Day, and they're celebrating not being in Europe anymore. And in the middle of it, they get told, hey, all these new guys are here. We're ready to leave to go back in. Oh, by the way, we're not flying over there. We're going over there and doing the same way we did it last time. We're jumping in.
Yep.
Because Operation Market Garden was going to kick off.
So they had just lost all those guys, and now they're about to go do it all again.
All again with new guys who didn't have that 2-3 years of training with them.
Yep. Yep.
Who they didn't trust. That they were still trying to get over. They were just starting to come to grips with the loss of all those guys. And war, as it does. And I wanted to bring this up. I'll tell the story, even though I was going to cut it, since Eddie wanted to tell giant long stories of his Fort Hood dickhead days.
You're welcome.
Thank you. I thank you for it. But anyway, everyone that's ever been in a unit that's got a high op tempo understands this moment. So my very first deployment to combat was the invasion of Iraq. I was in the Q course when 9/11 happened. Got to the unit after they already gone into Afghanistan. My first deployment as a combat deployment ever was the invasion of Iraq. I was on the ground for 4 months. We got brought home. You know why we got brought home? Because in 30 days after getting brought home, we had to go on a 6-month deployment to Afghanistan. So I got that. This whole thing that they go through in this moment where we just get home from combat. I had a significant event happen to me over in during the invasion, which I don't talk about by myself, but Not for any specific reason. I just don't bring it up. But let's just say I've got that going on. Now I got to go home so I can spend a month home and turn around and go to Afghanistan so I can find out what real terror is like when I start getting ambushed in Afghanistan.
So it's the high and the low and the high and the low and that.
Well, not just that, but it's the you think you've seen the worst of it.
Yeah.
Right? Easy Company, anyone from Easy Company will tell you the worst of it was the Battle of the Bulge.
Yeah.
And like for me, the worst of it was the buildup of IEDs and the ambushes at will of the enemy on us in Afghanistan that I experienced after thinking that I had experienced the most significant thing I've ever going to experience, which was the incident at Debeka Pass in Iraq. So just like them, I thought I'd seen it all, but I didn't see shit, and they didn't see shit yet. And there's so much friggin' intelligence in the writing of this show, in the building of these characters, that you don't see as a non-combat. But thank God you have me here and my guest to bring this out to you, because now when you watch it, even you guys who's been in combat that didn't ever realize this, watch it as a combat guy. It is brilliantly written and filmed. And so they get Operation Market Garden. They're going back to Holland, and they're going to go for the all hands on deck, big push to Berlin. Let's end this before Christmas. Right? It's like July. Right? So they want to end it before Christmas. So Operation Market Garden was British Field Marshal Montgomery's, who was the second in command to the Allied forces under Eisenhower. It was his scheme for thrusting through Holland and into Germany, a plan that would hopefully lead to the drive through northern Germany to Berlin, taking German resistance from the rear and bringing combat in Europe to a quick conclusion. Now, that was the intent stated, and I can't see how it got past everyone to say take them from the rear. There was no rear front to the German war machine. So I don't know I think that in and of itself should have led people to think that this might be a faulty plan. It's a daytime jump for Easy Company.
Yep.
They jump in combat light, which means, for those of you who don't know it, is you jump in just what you need to fight immediately. You don't jump in with your rucksacks. You don't jump in for extended stay. That stuff was going to be followed on because they were staying there. There was no need to jump in with anything because it was a daytime jump, and there was still lots of resistance in this area from the Germans. There was a lot of fighting going on. This is one of the things that the show shows you. They make it seem like this is the easiest jump in the world. And for some units it was. But in reality, there had been considerable fighting in advance of the drop. Allied bombers had plastered German positions and suspected German positions, demolished large amounts of the Dutch infrastructure, including some really nice windmills, and killing many civilians as well as the Germans. The actual drop was not that pleasant either. Disaster, both accidental and by design, beset both sides of the fight. Richard Winters himself, the Easy Company commanding officer, recalled hearing a terrible commotion above the drop zone when he landed, to look up and see two gliders colliding and crashing to Earth, killing all the troops inside.
Wow.
Some never made it to the English coast. Glider mishaps were all over the place in this mission, killing a lot of dudes. But the jump itself for the paratroopers was uneventful. And that was something that I think was a bad thing for what was to come. So these guys jump. They assemble very quickly. Canadian and British forces, who were the main effort of this, start pushing. The movie A Bridge Too Far, about the operation, bills this as one of the most spectacular action scenes. The guy that made the book, made the movie, Joseph Levine, spent $22 million of his own money to produce the film in 1976 because no one wanted to pay for him to put the money in to do the scene of them doing the operation. He paid for it out of his own pocket. Wow. That's how big this was to the British and the Canadian forces. You know, they didn't have the big, massive connection to D-Day. They took part in it, but they had a smaller part. So they wanted this to be their big thing. It was completely, the planning was really infested with bad intelligence, with poor understanding by other units of what they were supposed to do, hence A Bridge Too Far. They went too far. And so it's really not a good indication of how the operation went down on the show. And when at the end of this episode, they tell you what we told you at the beginning, that it was a failure, you kind of don't understand because they liberated Holland.
Right.
But that wasn't the intent. So one of the scenes in this episode that's really poignant to me and really says a lot is the scene in the Holland town of Eindhoven. So these guys walk into Eindhoven, and it is like a mini France.
They're like stripping the women and cutting their hair.
Well, that's the dark part of it. But what they show you first is all the celebrations, all the stuff that we saw in northern Iraq after the fall of the statue. But they also got to see something else. And that's what you just said. In town center, they had a bunch of women who they said were Nazi sympathizers. Mm-hmm. And they were cutting their hair. They were ripping their clothes off. They were taking out everything on these women. I'm not going to defend people who identified and took up with the enemy as a means of survival. I have no problem with it. As a means of turning your back on your country when there's so many that were still actively resisting Nazi rule,
right?
I have an issue with it there, but I do not excuse the treatment of them for this reason alone, guys. And this is something that I think the character Webster brings up later. We're better than them. We have to stay better than them. The difference between us and them is we don't do those things. And the guys in Easy Company didn't know what to do. And it's very obvious that they're all just like, whoa. They understand. Just like I can say, I understand. But, dude, is real? They killed a lot of people. You have no idea. France and Holland killed a lot of Nazi sympathizers. The show even tones down what they did to these people.
Oh, yeah.
But the U.S. knew that it was not that was not what they were there for.
Well, I mean, and that's the other thing, too, is, I mean, how many times do we go into places like Iraq and Afghanistan and we're told ahead of time, you may, see things that would be considered illegal and wrong and et cetera here in the U.S.
Are you talking about Thursday nights?
Yeah, so that's part of their culture, and you can't get involved, and you got to let it be. And
yeah, guys, Thursday nights, they like to have sex with little boys in Afghanistan, specifically.
Yeah.
And we were told to ignore that. It's not a issue of culture. That's morality, and Eddie did a good job of being nice about it. I won't be. I think it's a horrible thing, and a lot of SF guys struggled with that because one guy failed, and you can read about him online. He actually beat the guy up. But it's an issue, and it's horrible, and it doesn't come from their religion. So I don't buy the command and the National Command Authority's stipulation to stay out of their culture. This is righteous changing of a culture when we're talking about hurting kids and damaging kids and setting up the next generation of child rapists.
Right. Yeah, man.
So anyway, that's my soapbox for this show.
We can go down a very long road of ethics and moral injury and all kinds of things
we can and who knows what the long-term effects of some of those guys from Easy Company, guys who were really intelligent and guys who were very self-aware. Webster is one of the most interesting characters. He was very self-aware and understood things. Harvard, he was the one that in the show mentions that Newman, the town the main part of the show takes place in, is the birthplace of Vincent van Gogh. Nobody seems to give a shit except for the officers and him when he says that.
Right.
Why? Because these guys came from cultures in the United States where who gives a shit where Vincent van Gogh? Who's Vincent van Gogh? Nowadays we know him, but then it was not. You had to be educated to know who that was, and that indicated Webster's understanding and his emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
But with that comes moral injury, and I would love to have known what the moral injury was of guys who walked away when they were cutting their hair and getting ready to assassinate a Nazi sympathizer and their child.
Right.
And let it happen. But we'll never know. So, the Brits and their tanks show up. Easy Company heads for Noonan, as I just said, another town, which Harvard-educated Private David Kenyon Webster points out as the birthplace of Vincent van Gogh to the miraculous sound of crickets by his men. It's at Noonan that the Easy Company meets disaster this day, right? So approaching the town, Lieutenant Bob Brewer is in the lead. He is never mentioned in the show beforehand, and I guess he's there just so that they can kill a lieutenant. A German sniper shoots Brewer through the throat, and all hell breaks loose. And some of the most intense battle footage in the entire series is done in this 5-minute scene. The firing is close and intense. Men of Easy Company attempt to point out a German Tiger tank to an approaching British tank commander. He does and this is another thing he does exactly what the Dutch pilots did in Afghanistan back in the late 2000s. Said, "Oh, I believe you that they're there, but I can't see them, so I'm not dropping." And we would be like, "No, man, you got to drop or we're going to die." Nope, can't do it. That's what this reminded me of. This British tank commander just didn't believe that the enlisted guy and ends up getting himself killed, ultimately, by a Tiger tank. And then they run off. The Brits run off. Most of their crews get killed by this tank, and Easy Company's got to pull out of Noonan. You know, they've got a lot of guys killed, and a lot of them were replacements. In the show, it shows Sergeant Bull Randleman being wounded by fragments from an exploding shell and left behind. I think this was done to build up the emotional what happened. I don't want to believe that they left knowing he was still there.
I think I
can't see Martin and Toy leaving.
No, I think it was in the fog of war, right? A lot of shit was going down. He was separated. And now for film, in order to increase some of that emotional connection with the other characters, they were, obviously distraught that Bull was left. But I think in reality, the way it actually went down was he was separated, and it may not have even been found out until sometime after that he was no longer kind of with the group.
And you got to give his replacement privates a pass because they've been told to shut the fuck up, right? So when they're all going back to Eindhoven and reconsolidating, of course they wouldn't say, hey, Randleman never came back and consolidated with us.
Right.
And it wasn't until later. So before I give it over to you to talk about everything that happens in the town of Noonan, I have to put this out. Bull Randleman's story, and I mean that the way I said it, Bull Randleman's story of what happened once he got separated from his unit is not a source of controversy. It is not in Band of Brothers, the book. There's a reason why. The only person that can corroborate what Bull Randleman says happened is Bull Randleman. Mm-hmm. And because he was a historic author, Stephen Ambrose never wrote anything that wasn't academically sourced and backed up by multiple sources. I believe Bull Randleman's story, and I think you should also. But I have to make it clear that we don't know if any of this truly happened. Having said that, everyone's pulled out. Bull Randleman's there, and I turn it over to the man who has made Bull Randleman his avatar, Mr. Eddie Lazzari. Eddie, please spin a yarn about Bull Randleman in the town of Noonan.
Yeah, so Randleman then fought, like you said, in Market Garden in Holland, where he and Easy Company were swarmed by an adoring crowds of the Dutch people who were calling them the liberators. He was then seen marching with Easy Company, and the Sherman tank with Lieutenant Brewer, which you talked about, went out to scan the area. Randleman yelled a warning, but Brewer was then shot and wounded in the throat by a sniper. Randleman then helped him, calling for a medic as he joined up with his men who were taking cover in the town of Noonan. They were then besieged by German tanks and the infantry, and this is when kind of all hell breaks loose. Mm-hmm. Randleman tries to escape, but he was wounded when some tank shrapnel hit his left shoulder. He then took cover in a barn and waited.
Well, let's not get that. There's a scene that I think is they show him in like a transition scene in a
trench thing,
drainage ditch. And this is where, when I'm watching it, I'm like, really, was he that close to them? Was he right there? And that's why I had to say what I said up front. License may have been taken with this story a little bit.
Right.
I would expect someone of his intelligence to know that he needs to get away from traveled paths, and a bridge with water going under it is a natural draw. And I think he would have been either in where he was at later in the barn or in the woods by the barn. That's my opinion. Yeah. But I don't know who came up with that whole part of him hiding in the drainage ditch, because it just looks too Hollywood to me.
I think the whole point of the drainage ditch was this point of decision that the writers of the show wanted the audience to go through. It's the proverbial, do I stay or do I go? Do I risk running out and trying to join with my men, or do I stay put and try to wait it out and see? Right? It's this.
Right. That's a good point. But I think it's not that. I think it's the other thing. I think it's the show him how hopeless his situation was. He was surrounded on all sides by Nazis.
Right.
He couldn't go anywhere in that scene.
No. Right.
So
absolutely
it makes sense.
Right.
Now, had he been hiding in the woods, why didn't he just bootleg around and connect with his guys?
Right. I think it was definitely in a dilemma, and in combat you do what you think you need to do to survive, and obviously not making a run for it, trying to get back with his guys, because he probably realized that would have been the end of him. Not only that, but he was wounded. And
that's why I give him a pass.
Yeah.
Any instance he could have been in where he could have retreated is nullified by the fact that he's injured, and not just injured, he's injured and bleeding. Yeah. And he may not have been conscious for much of it. He could have woken up hours later after being unconscious in the same place he was when he got hit. Well, and it's fuck, what the hell?
So this is shrapnel taken from a tank round, right? And for anyone's taken shrapnel by, an RPG or a tank round or an IED.
I've done it. It's not pretty.
It knocks you silly, man. I mean, it's a totally different experience than being shot, for sure. I don't speak from experience, but I know people that have been both hit with shrapnel and with bullets, and
I can speak from experience, and you're absolutely right.
Yeah, getting hit with shrapnel, it definitely, for the lack of a better term, takes the wind out of you, right? And gives you, makes you have to regroup and try to figure out what the hell is going on. So he's probably in this extremely dazed state, taking tank round shrapnel to the shoulder. And for those of you that may not be aware, these pieces of shrapnel come in different varying shapes and sizes, but they're all extremely sharp and extremely hot and causes a shit ton of damage. It hurts like hell. It doesn't just through and through. It rips and tears, and oh god, it's just awful. So that's what he's facing right in his shoulder. So he's obviously not equipped physically to engage in any kind of hand-to-hand combat, which I think makes the part next in the barn so dramatic. Is he's in there, trying to eat some grub or some food that he's got. A Dutch farmer and his daughter enter the barn, and the farmer helps with Randleman's wound. And of course, remember, we were just talking about sympathizers.
Randleman has to do some efforts to win him over, I think.
Well,
I think that's made vague, but it's made there. I see, they're weary of him.
Well, first. Yeah, I mean, because we were just talking about German sympathizers. So Randleman doesn't know what side of the fence this farmer and his daughter land on, right? Were they German sympathizers?
That's another occupying force in their eyes. They might be, you know what I mean? They don't know they're liberators. They may look at them as intruders.
Yep, and then of course you got the language barrier, right? Neither one of them can understand each other from a verbal standpoint. So it's probably, you've been in that situation. You're doing a whole lot of hand gestures, and you're trying to read the person. Yeah, you're trying to read people's faces, and you've got culture barriers that kind of make that difficult. But anyway, so the farmer helped Randleman with his wound. Before Randleman could leave, a group of Germans come into the barn. They hid, and eventually most of the soldiers left. One stayed behind after finding the bloodied cloth left by Randleman. The Dutch girl accidentally
which to me is one of the things I don't like, because you just had a major fight happen there. There probably was blood all over the place.
Probably was.
Yet this one piece of cloth, bloody cloth, makes this guy go crazy. Yeah. And so and the fact that it's a hand-to-hand, duel-it-out fight leads some people to think this was a fabricated story. But let me put out something. This is the third time in history that he fought hand-to-hand with someone. So he had no need of that story to make himself important. He had already done it twice before.
Yeah, he was caught into a tree on one jump and ended up releasing, I don't know the entire story, released himself and ended up getting into a hand-to-hand.
A bayonet duel, they called it.
Exactly, and ended up. So this isn't the first life that he took via hand-to-hand combat, which, folks, is not as easy as it looks in Hollywood, for sure. Hand-to-hand combat is a brutal thing.
It is the real separation between the men and the sheep.
Yeah. And that kind of brings us up to date with that scene. One of the scenes before that I wanted to kind of bring up before we jumped into it was a scene where they were kind of walking. I think they were walking towards Noonan, and they were kind of like in a patrol type of position. Mm-hmm. And one of the new recruits, before they get to the city, tries to put on a bayonet, and Bull walks up to him, and he just kind of he's got the cigar in his mouth and kind of looks at the new guy and he says,
it's going to affect your point of aim, point of impact.
No, he says, hold on, I wrote it down here. It says, hold on, let me see.
This, guys, is why I love Eddie and Bennett. These moments when they try to read something.
Yeah, I know.
It's fantastic.
That's why I know you can edit it out. Oh,
no,
so
I'm not editing this out. I love this.
So he says that you won't be able to shoot as straight with that on. And that's all he says. And he kind of walks away. Now, as an NCO,
we know that's bullshit.
Well, no, I mean, not necessarily. I mean, as an NCO, it would be for me, I would have been like, fucking put that away, private, right? That would have been me, right? And that would have been probably a lot of NCOs.
Don't you take away the fixed bayonets command from the officer. He's dying to use it. No, really, I think it's a misnomer, man. You do not affect your point of aim, point of impact, or shooting straight by putting a bayonet on there. The bayonet is fixed and hangs from the front sight post, which does not connect directly to the barrel. So it's an old wives' tale. It's something very popular. We've all heard it. That's why it works. But it's not accurate. And I think what is better to say, and I wish they would do this, is to have the argument that you want to add an extra 7 inches onto the end of that weapon that bounces off of everything while you're trying to maneuver. That's that would be a better one, I think.
You're in greater risk of wounding yourself with the
right.
bayonet.
You're going to stab yourself or one of your buddies.
Yeah. But I think the leadership point I wanted to kind of take away from that was the way that he engaged that private. And instead of saying, don't do that, he kind of just said,
let him make the decision.
Yeah, this is what could happen. Your call, right? And it kind of, from a leadership standpoint, it's a teachable moment if we're talking about lessons in leadership, right? Sometimes we as leaders or as experienced individuals, we know what the end result or the outcome would or could be, but sometimes you almost kind of have to put out the scenario to Joe and say, hey, if you do that, this is what would happen. And then you kind of let Joe make up his own mind.
Right. And
that private quickly took off his bayonet and put it away. Whether or not shooting accurate or not was
it's false. I will go to court with that. It's false.
Well, no. I don't disagree with you, but we don't know what they were told then.
No,
right?
We do. They were told what he said.
Yeah, right. They were told that
right.
They would not shoot as accurately, right?
Right. So they were. So I mean, that's why it's not wrong, but it is something that I just wish didn't last as long, because we heard it, didn't we? I know I heard it when I was a private. Bayonets will affect your aim. Right. That comes from this time period, and it's bullshit.
Right. It is. It's bayonets. Bayonets will probably hurt more than it will. If you get to the point you actually got.
Yeah, I was just gonna say it. The scariest command in the history of warfare for an infantryman is fixed bayonets.
Yeah, I mean you got no more ammo. Like your weapon is your weapon is now the weapon, right?
You're now in hand-to-hand combat, the real thing.
That's right, exactly.
But
sucks. Anyway,
it's a good point. It
was just as I was watching this episode, I was literally taking notes, and my wife kind of chuckled at me. I was like, the last time I watched something on TV and took notes was back in high school or something. Yeah. So, and I also wanted to bring up too, this is
I appreciate you saying that, Eddie. That gives me that makes me feel good.
What, that I took notes while I watched
this because episode? That means you're preparing for what will be a no holds barred friggin' episode. And that says a lot about me.
Well, thanks, man. So this is also when Sobel makes his reappearance as well.
Well, not now, before they leave Europe, or before they leave, but yes, we did skip over that. Let's talk about that.
Right. Yeah. So in the episode, towards the end there, Sobel makes his reappearance after having been reassigned to go train paratroopers. He comes back now. Whether or not this is actual historical or not, I don't know.
It is historic fact.
Oh, okay. So he comes back, and everybody's just kind of like, "Oh fuck," right? Like,
hold on. He comes back with Popeye, who had been wounded during the assault. Remember, Popeye had been shot in the ass during the assault on the howitzers.
Yeah.
Popeye comes out of a Jeep, and he's like, yeah, Sobel gave me a ride back. He said, jump in, I'll give you a ride. And they're all like, Sobel said that? He's like, yeah, right? And then Sobel does something that, for the first time in the show, even back when I first saw it, I don't disagree with. So Malarkey has been out with one of the other guys that, every time I watch it, I think it's Grenier, but I don't think it's not Grenier that's driving the motorcycle. It's one of the other guys. But they're drinking, they're having a good time in this friggin' side-by-side. Fucking acting like a bunch of assholes, like a bunch of friggin' Joes do. Young guys. Remember, these guys may have gotten rank fast, but they were not mature.
Right.
Warriors
sure.
are great warriors for a reason. We cannot be counted on to make good decisions unless there's rounds being fired. I'll say that, and every guy that's been a warrior and made their life fighting combat, I'm right. Put a bunch of generals in a group together, and it's like a bunch of privates in a group together.
Mm-hmm.
Without the hierarchy and without the conflict, we are unstable idiots who make bad decisions. That's why we can do the things we do. So this is an example of that. Now, without making the comment that, hey man, you just fucking survived D-Day. How about not drinking and stealing government property and putting yourself as a target, and you just got promoted?
Right.
That's how I would have handled it. Sobel just goes right to Sobel and says,
exactly.
Sergeant Malarkey, are you aware that this is, he doesn't say that. He goes, they're putting the motorcycle on the back of the truck. And he goes, Malarkey, you didn't think that I was going to let you keep it, did you? This is U.S. government property. And even though Malarkey has this moment with him of Sobel, it's the one time that I was like, yeah, right on, man. You're right. And I think that no one says anything because they know he's right too.
Right.
And one thing that's not gone into is the reverence that many of the Easy Company guys had later on for Sobel. At this moment, he's a young, stupid idiot making a bad decision, and Sobel could literally charge him with something.
Right.
And what does Sobel do? He doesn't even go after Malarkey. He only talks to Malarkey because Malarkey comes over to look at them taking his motorcycle.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, I respect Sobel so much for that.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry we missed it at the time it happened in the show, but it is a good point because it is the last time you see Sobel in the show.
Yeah, and
it's a good closure to the Sobel thing where he still will not be treated like a failure.
Right.
Because he's not wrong.
And they set up that relationship early on, even in episode 1, when Sobel says,
Malarkey
isn't that shit for bullshit?
Yeah, isn't that Malarkey, huh? Isn't that
slang for bullshit?
Slang for bullshit?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's funny because it's true. It is slang for bullshit.
It is, right. Absolutely. So, yeah, man, that pretty much, I mean...
Well, let's talk about the ending. So at the ending of it, and this is one of the problems I have with the episode, the real only problem I have with the episode. The ending has the scroll that gives you a little bit extra information about Market Garden being a failure. But other than having to pull out and come back the next day to get Randleman, oh, by the way, which was headed by his replacements going after him by themselves, which I'm not going to talk about because I don't feel the need to explain why they were going after their leader. Yeah. If you can't figure that out, this show is not going to help you out. You've got more problems if you can't figure out why they did that. So I want to go chase down Bull Randleman, and I've never met the guy. That's how good of a job he does.
Yeah.
But anyway, they say about it was a failure, and it prolonged the war. It prolonged the war because it set up the Battle of the Bulge. It pushed forces so deep into Nazi territory that once they were there, they couldn't come back. And the Battle of the Bulge was spawned by this operation. Believe it. All right? Because it's the truth. All right? So it was not the end of Easy Company's tour in Holland, obviously. They were to stay there through October. With Market Garden and the Allies had pushed a pencil-thin column deep into German-held territory, which would become the Battle of the Bulge. And they spent the following months holding it. In the weeks to come, Easy would further distinguish itself in some spectacular encounters with German counterattacks. But that's not put on there because they can't put everything they did in the show. But they did continually have fights. So, one of the guys that's injured during this episode is Webster. He's injured during the attack on Noonan. That's important, guys. That's important to note that he was injured here. He had jumped into D-Day. He had been there for Market Garden. He gets injured here, along with a bunch of other guys, but his injury and his absence from what was coming made him an outsider to the Easy Company men because they have their biggest events coming up. And that's the thing about this is just every time you think that they can't show you something that's just more emotional and more evocative of war, something else happens. And the Battle of the Bulge is one of the most argued and analyzed pieces of combat ever. Because if you ask anybody in the 1st Armored Division, they'll tell you it ended it one way. If you ask guys who were on the ground there, they'll tell you it ended a different way. But that's coming later. In the meanwhile, I want to thank Eddie Lazzari for coming on. That's it. The credits are rolling right now. There's a bunch of music playing. There's all kinds of crap going on. We're looking at all the British actors playing American people. It's
I will
awesome.
tell you. Okay.
When I'm done, this entire episode
cut out a lot.
When I'm done, this episode is going to be 10 minutes.
It's like an hour. I know, because you're gonna have like sound clips to drop in here, and
well, I don't need sound clips when I've got you talking about 2 episodes ago for a half hour. Band of Brothers, or Eddie's experiences at Fort Hood.
There you go. Right, man.
I'm just kidding.
Well, that's the lessons learned, though.
The funny part is I'm still not closed out this episode yet, so all this will be part of the episode. This is the one episode we're having fun with.
Oh, close it out. Go for it.
Yeah, let's close this out. So, guys, Eddie Lazzari, the guy who started Change Your POV, the host of the Attack Friday show and the Change Your POV flagship show. Eddie, go ahead and tell our listeners and our new listeners where they can find you online to follow you if they want to get yelled at.
Yeah, man. So listen, you can find all of the show notes for this episode and more by heading over to changeyourpov.com. Once you're there, you go to the top, you'll see where it says podcast. You can hover over that, and it will drop down all of the shows. We got a lot of them. We got a lot more headed your way. So never miss an episode. Hit subscribe on your podcast player of choice. We have a lot more great content headed your way. And hey, come be a part of our community over at Change Your POV Squad. We also have one called Lessons in Leadership of the Band of Brothers.
That's actually this one.
That's this one. That's correct.
Yeah.
So
you did exactly what I do at the beginning of the episodes. I introduce this as Changing Hearts and Minds.
So yeah, and hey, we would love an honest rating and review. Head over to iTunes, search for Change Your POV, give us a rating and review. We read every one of them.
Right on, man. Hey, do me a favor. Give me your social media places like I asked for.
Oh yeah, man. So you can find me anywhere. Just go on Google and type in Eddie.
I can find you on Tinder?
No.
Then I can't find you anywhere.
So you can go to Google, search and type in Eddie Lazzari, and I'll come up. So you can find me on Twitter, on LinkedIn, Facebook,
Instagram.
I do have an Instagram, but I don't keep up with it, man. I don't quite understand Instagram. I'll be honest with you.
It's photographs, Eddie. It's photographs.
I don't get it. Don't get it.
It's the oldest form of human communication in the technological age.
I just don't get it. But yeah, man. Or you can just go to changeyourpv.com and go to About, and you can look at all of the hosts of the show and click on my name, and you can connect with me directly or whatever, man.
And guys, and to close it all out, you can go to the show notes page for this one episode, and I will have all the links that Eddie failed to get out on
there
that
you go.
show notes page. Yeah. Well, that's why I do that. I do that because I can't count on you guys to do the right thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can count on you guys to do the right thing.
You want me to actually give you the URLs? Is that what you're looking for?
No.
Like if you go to http://
No. Like
/
Jeff Adamec on Facebook and
okay, so at
No, it's fine. I don't want it now.
At Eddie_Lazzari or at change_your_POV. You can connect with me there on Twitter.
And don't do that until you connect with at Jeff Adamec or at Changing Hearts and Minds with Jeff Adamec, because
man, that's a lot of choices for the listeners. They're
there's really no choice.
Just go to changeyourpov.com and all of it's there. It's there. All of it's there.
It is all there. Plus, there's other guys there too that are
right.
So, and those guys can be fun.
Connect with all of us. They can be fun.
Or connect with none of us, but listen to the shows. That's the important thing.
Very good.
Thank you, Eddie. Thank you for taking time out of your busy Sunday, getting up early, and all that nonsense.
Lessons in Leadership, Band of Brothers is a production of Changing Hearts and Minds, hosted by Jeff Adamec on the Change Your POV podcast network. You can find other amazing shows on the network by going over to changeyourpov.com. Huge thanks goes out to all the amazing guests featured in the episodes of this series. First, our very own network hosts, Eddie Lazzari and Bennett Tanton, hosts of Change Your POV podcast and Attack Friday. Dwayne France, host of Headspace and Timing. Andrew McDowell, host of Neophyte in the Woods. And our newest host, Benjamin Loth, hosting a show releasing soon called Branding with Benjamin. Special thanks goes out to some amazing podcast hosts who have donated their time and opinions to the series. Sam Culper of Breakers Podcast, Brad Taylor of Sofa Kings Podcast, Nick Giglio of Conspiracy Geeks Podcast, and last but certainly not least, to the man who probably had the biggest role in making Band of Brothers the series that it is today, a staple amongst military ranks and revered by all who have worn the uniform. Here's a huge salute to you, Captain Dale Dye. Owner of Warriors Inc., Dale also has a new film in the making and is planning on using veterans to be part of the cast and crew. To learn more about this and to get the links to all of the podcasts and podcast hosts mentioned, head on over to changeyourpov.com/Band of Brothers, all one word. If you like this series, share it with someone you think would like it too. Thanks for listening, and in the words of Dick Winters, I thank God for seeing me through the day of days and prayed I would make it through D+1. I also promised that if some way I could get home again, I would find a nice, peaceful town and spend the rest of my life in peace.